back with Richard Southern. And Richard, there's no shortage of intriguing stories to chat about today. Let's begin with something that many Canadians are struggling to explain.
Turns out, Erica, UFO sightings are through the roof during the pandemic here in Canada. So maybe we've got more time to look up into the sky, or maybe there's actually something going on up there. New report from ufology research says sightings of unidentified flying objects across Canada, including things like levitating discs, erratic spaceships, and floating triangles, increased 46% in 2020 over 2019 levels. There were 1,243 recorded sightings last year, a record for Canada. 30% of the sightings taking place right here in Ontario. And before you go and call all these people crackpots, Erica, we've talked about the fact that the U.S. government has admitted that its military pilots have recorded, things they can't explain, craft moving, defying the laws of physics, and the Pentagon due to release a report before June 1st detailing what the U.S. government knows. So who knows, there might be something to this. You see a lot of strange things. You got to look at me every day, right, Eric?
No, not at all. But I will say for the UFO part of it, I think a small percentage are actually unexplained. The rest of them you can sort of attribute to balloons or planes or something like that.
Or too many cocktails or
maybe
something. But
that too.
There's something to it. Maybe we'll get more in this report. We'll let you know about that when we get it in from the U.S. government.
All right.
Do Canadians have better data on UFOs than Americans? Chris Rutkowski says they do. Canadian author and ufologist Chris Rutkowski joins me to discuss current Canadian UAP politics and why Canadians potentially might be the best at researching UFOs. Join us as we get rebelliously curious. Chris, thank you for joining me on Rebelliously Curious. So as a fellow Canadian, I'm super excited to speak with you because I'm curious to see your thoughts about politics within this topic within Canada, along with then culture and all the recent news that's been happening. So you've been collecting data about UFOs within Canada since 1965, which is unbelievable. I would say that you probably have, you can tell me if I'm wrong or not, the most comprehensive UFO database, or did have the most comprehensive UFO database. So before we get into that, I would like to ask you just simply, how did you get into the UFO topic?
Well, first, thank you for having me on. And not since 65, since 75. I'm not 75. Quite that old. Okay. Yeah, not quite that old. Okay. I may look it, but that's how.
No, you don't. You don't.
It started in the 70s. But when I was growing up, my mom and dad, had me plop in front of the TV set to watch the Gemini launches in Apollo. I remember being in school when they wheeled in a TV and watched Neil Armstrong walk on the moon and that type of thing. And in the mid 70s, there were quite a lot of UFOs being reported. It was in the news quite a bit. And reports started coming into the astronomy office because I was in university and thought I would go into astronomy for the hot cars and money. And it never happened. But the phone calls were coming in from people who had seen UFOs, and my profs really weren't that thrilled about UFOs. They thought, oh, it's nonsense, don't worry about it. But it was interfering with their research. They couldn't get anything done. So I happened to be in the office when one of my profs got a phone call. I said, hey, I'll take the call for you, thinking I could, suck up to my prof. And it worked because I ended up getting these calls, and I ended up talking with many people who had seen things. And as you might expect, most of them turn out to be stars and planets and satellites and that type of thing. But there were some that I didn't really know what those were, and I thought they were curious. And it was about a year and a half or so later when my prof asked me to give a small presentation to the Department of Physics on what I had heard. And as an undergraduate, that's very unusual for an undergraduate to give a presentation in the physics department. But I agreed to it. And then once word got around I was going to give a presentation, they had to move it to the largest lecture hall on campus. So I found myself speaking to like 400 people about what I had heard about the UFOs that had been reported. And that sort of mushroomed from there. And that's how I got into the UFO thing.
Wow. 400 people? And even in the 70s, I would think 400 people now, but in the 70s, that's amazing, especially in Canada too. And you'll get into we'll get into
Yeah.
Canada and UFOs and all the wonderful reasons why maybe we don't speak about them so much. But 400 people, that's amazing.
Well, and of course,
Congrats. Yeah.
back then that was before internet. So where would people get their information from? It was either magazines or from newspapers and occasional TV shows. But to to get all the information, having a lecture on UFOs, that was that was fantastic. So people were really interested in coming out to that.
Yeah, and word of mouth. That's the
Yeah.
big part. Yeah. You would say a lot of people were on campus and they were spreading that word. And that's the best type of marketing is word of mouth
Mhm.
marketing, I would
And
say.
that was the same time when Stan Friedman was
Right.
going across North America lecturing at colleges and universities. As a matter of fact, he came to the university I was at in 77, I think, 78, I think. And Alan Hynek had
Wow.
come to our university in 1976 because there had been some UFOs that were seen, and he actually came to investigate, and he was also had done a lecture. And that's when I first met him. And both Stan and Alan Hynek both ended up staying at my place, believe it or not. They slept over. Um, and it was such a great experience, to have these mentors from, sort of little different perspectives, but to have them both, so early in my ufology career.
Yeah. Did you take a photo with everyone?
Yeah, I have
Did,
some photos of those.
did you?
Yeah.
I'd love to see that. That's such a
Yeah.
great memory. I think when
Yeah.
people like that come together, like those moments 100% have to be documented. I
Mhm.
love that you bridged into Alan Hynek because I want to talk a little bit about Project Blue Book.
Mhm.
Project Blue Book, as most people know, obviously are following UFO topic, looking in a program that was researching UFOs in the States. We had something kind of similar called Project Magnet, I believe in the 1950s. And this is before the Conan report in the early 60s. Can you tell us a little bit about Project Magnet? And I believe it was Mr. Wilbert Smith that headed
Mhm.
that, along with then U of T playing a part in this too. So can you break down for anybody who doesn't understand what Project Magnet is or what it would entail and how maybe it was connected to Project Blue Book at one point in time?
Sure. And in addition to Project Magnet, there was a second one called Project Second Story, which was sort of almost concurrent, but they're both in the 1950s. And a fellow in the engineering Department of Radio and Electrical Engineering in Transport Canada had taken an interest in flying saucers. He thought that flying saucers flew somehow with following magnetic lines, that type of thing. And he was his personal interest. He was authorized to do a study on magnetic propulsion and principles like that. So he kind of snuck in the back door with that regard. And because Blue Book was going on, and before then Grudge and Sign, Second Story was the Canadian version of that, where a number of individuals within the Defense Research Board were investigating and looking at UFOs from a security standpoint, which is what Blue Book was working on. But following that, in the 1960s, the Defense Research Board, the National and Department of National Defense got out of the UFO business and passed it along to the National Research Council of Canada, which is kind of like the Canadian equivalent of the Smithsonian, kind of led some of those scientific advances. And the premise was that it was a scientific issue, not a defense issue, because following in with what the United States Air Force said, there didn't appear to be any defense or a security issue regarding UFOs. It was something else. And so, taken on by the National Research Council, the National Research Council partnered with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who are not really the Mounties, the Dudley Do-Rights necessarily, but are more equivalent to the CIA because they are sort of very broad and take on a lot of responsibilities and investigations in terms of security as well as safety and investigations and criminal actions. So they partnered with that. And so the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who of course had departments and detachments all across the country, would investigate UFOs for the National Research Council talk to the witnesses, get the statements, send them into Ottawa. And that is how the arrangement was until about mid 1990s. So from the 40s to the 90s, there's actually a very consistent, thorough record of Canada investigating UFOs at the official level. And we also have the documentation. So Blue Book finished in 69. And after that point, we really don't know really what was going on in the Pentagon with regard to UFOs. In Canada, we have a consistent record. As a matter of fact, since Canada's partnered with NATO, there was in fact some investigation of UFOs in Canada that the information was sent to NATO. Sorry, not necessarily NATO, NORAD rather. Canada's partnered with NORAD. Of course, we're all partnered with NATO, but because of the NORAD connection, the defense of North America was involved, and so UFOs were investigated in Canada for NORAD, which was passed along to the Pentagon that way. So we have that record in Canada, but it's actually kind of missing in the United States. So it's very curious to see what's going on.
Yeah. Why did we stop then? Because, we get to Project Blue Book and then we just get out of the UFO business. Canada's like, we don't want to do this anymore. Why was that? Was that an influence from our American counterparts? Or was that because of people and reports like the Condon Committee and the Condon Report that came out saying that, this isn't really anything and let's just move on, and science not giving it credit? Was it because of that? Was that one of the major reasons that we just decided? Because we saw in the early 70s, as you were saying, we also have, people at officials in all different levels saying that we need to take this seriously around the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. But, we just see it kind of die after Project Blue Book. So, what would be the reason for that?
Well, it's actually related to something that's happening right at the moment in the United States. The Pentagon's taken an interest right now. There's some talk of getting congressional inquiries going on. In fact, some of the issues were raised, in congressional subcommittees. And people are saying, wow, if only Congress took an interest in UFOs. Well, it turns out in 1966, Gerald Ford, before he was president, lobbied for a congressional investigation into UFOs. And it actually happened in 1968. There was a congressional investigation, a panel, an inquiry into UFOs in the United States in 1968. And in 1969, the year after, Project Blue Book closed down. And the politics of that was because, there were scientists who gave excellent presentations. Hynek was involved. Another number of other individuals, James McDonald, were involved. And they gave great presentations on the UFO subject, but there wasn't enough meat there for the Pentagon anyways to say, let's continue investigating as a defense problem. So they closed it down, and that's where Blue Book, slammed the door, and similarly Condon. So after that point, we're not sure. And so when people are getting excited about congressional inquiries in the United States in 2022, well, let's just hope it doesn't suffer the same fate as what happened in 1968 and shut everything down. The good news is, the landscape is changed a little bit. There's a little more science opposed to defense. And the model, I suppose, is Canada, in that the Canadians were looking at it from a scientific perspective. But in 1995, even the National Research Council got out of the UFO business in Canada. They terminated the agreement between them and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and Transport Canada took over sort of the realm of UFOs. Transport Canada is the equivalent of the FAA in the United States. And between 1995 to the present day, UFO reports continue to be filed by pilots and are recorded by Transport Canada and also another organization, a non-government organization called NAV Canada, which is sort of at arm's distance to everything. So we actually have a complete record of what's being reported officially and investigated officially in Canada from the 1940s to now, which is not what we have in the United States whatsoever. And it's very interesting that, people are posting things about pilots who have seen things fly around their planes. Well, we're having those all the time in Canada. In fact, because of the shared agreement with NORAD, a lot of the cases go right into the United States anyways. And also, in fact, we've had some of these fairly recently where American pilots having to fly over Canada. There was one classic case where a pilot was flying from Alaska down into, I think, Minneapolis, and happened to be flying right over Canada, of course. And the pilot saw a UFO over Saskatchewan. And because it was in Canada, he made his UFO report to Transport Canada. So we have an American pilot filing a UFO report in Canada. And so we do know that there's a little bit of spillover between the two countries. But if you look at it in the whole context of North American defense and airspace, there's still a lot of investigation and research going on, and the data is there.
Wow. And so you're telling me that Canadians probably are better at documenting UFOs than the Americans? Is that what you're telling me, Chris?
Absolutely. In terms of documenting, in terms of investigation, maybe as well, because we also have the Royal Canadian Mounted Police interviews with witnesses, for example, in the 80s and 90s. So there was some significant investigation. There was, so I've mentioned already Project Magnet, Project Second Story, and then the National Research Council, and they were conducting investigations at a fairly high level. In fact, some of the cases in the 60s in Canada resulted in literally hundreds of pages of documentation, which we have because we've gone searching for the documents in the Library and Archives Canada and the National Libraries of Canada. And we've retrieved many of these documents. In fact, my collection of documents includes everything that's been reported up until the present time. And it's quite substantial. I do something called the Canadian UFO survey every year. I coordinated with other researchers from coast to coast. And we look at all the data, kind of a snapshot of all the reports that are filed in a given year. It turns out in Canada, there's something like 750 to 1,000 UFO reports every year that are officially filed. They come from, just not the average person, but filed with UFO organizations, not just in Canada, but also in the United States, like Peter Davenport's New Fork site, with MUFON, with Canadian groups like the ones in Quebec. There's one called UFO BC in British Columbia. And we put all this data together, including what's reported through Transport Canada by pilots and air traffic controllers and so forth. And we get an idea of what's being seen and do some crunching of the data and numbers. So when I hear that, Project Galileo is looking for solid data and, important scientific data, well, we have a lot of that. In fact, since we started doing the Canadian UFO survey in the late 1980s, we have something close to 25,000 separate UFO reports in Canada. And that's way more than Project Blue Book ever had. So, the data is there. It's just a matter of, crunching it and looking at it and doing some analysis.
I would like to chat with you about Larry McGuire. So recently he brought up in our parliament and talked about why we need to be very keen on what's going on around our own nuclear bases and talking about, military activity that's happening with UFOs. Can you explain to me why you thought that Larry would have jumped into this topic right now? We know that Americans and what's going on right now within the Senate probably plays a big part of that, but why would Larry have this type of inclination to come out now and say it? Is it something that would be a political slant for him? Or do you think that this is something that he might be really actually deeply connected to?
Well, Larry McGuire is a member of Parliament, and he had actually contacted me a year or two ago now, because he's always had a strong interest in the subject, out of his personal interest. But and I'll go back to the Transport Canada cases. Part of the problem is we have these pilot cases that are making their way to Transport Canada, and the argument is if these UFOs and things that are reported by Transport Canada are not real, whatever that might mean. Let's say the pilot is mistaken. Well, it's not good for pilots to be mistaken about things that are flying around in the sky. there are cases where some of the instruments on board the aircraft show, for example, the radar shows there's something there when there's not anything there, or conversely, it doesn't detect something that people are seeing with their own eyes. Now, if there's an equipment malfunction, that should be of concern as well. So even if you take aliens out of the question, and we haven't brought that up yet, thankfully, but if you take that out of the equation, there's a lot of reasons why UFO reports should be studied and investigated. You know, if it's a problem with the pilots, a problem with the technology, if it's some sort of other natural phenomenon, you know, these are all good reasons to investigate. So one of the reasons that Larry Maguire had contacted me was to find out information about what's going on in Canadian skies. And somebody had filed an Access to Information Act request. In Canada, it's an Access to Information. In the United States, it's a Freedom of Information Act, for what the Canadian government, you know, has been doing recently regarding UFOs, because the Minister of National Defense in 2021 requested a briefing on what the Canadian military was doing on UFOs. Whoever filed the request got the briefing, or the slides from the briefing, and I'm actually mentioned on the slides as being a person who's investigating the UFOs in Canada and working with national defense, which I do, I suppose. Because of that connection, there is this interest in what's going on in the sky. And Larry Maguire also looked specifically at what's going around at nuclear bases. This comes from a lot of the popular ufology right now, Robert Salas and people like that, are saying, you know, UFOs are attracted to nuclear bases and so forth. What about the nuclear bases in Canada, or nuclear sites in Canada? And we do have a number of them. As a matter of fact, there's one called Pickering, which is a little ways east of Toronto. And so I was asked, are there UFO reports in the Canadian UFO survey database of 25,000, any of those anywhere near nuclear sites? And it's a pretty simple procedure just to do a search. And sure enough, if you put in Pickering into the database, it pops up about 50 times. So yes, there are UFOs associated with nuclear sites in Canada. And I gave that information to Larry Maguire, and he is curious. He wants to know, is there any security issue regarding UFOs or UAPs over nuclear sites in Canada? And that was actually picked up by another MP, also from Manitoba, oddly enough. And she also raised the issue with the minister in charge of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, because they're also involved in this. And since then, a third member of Parliament has taken some interest. So there is some interest in by Canadian members of Parliament and politicians related to what's going on, and certainly spurred by what's going on, because in addition to contacting me, Larry Maguire contacted a number of individuals in the Scientific Coalition for Ufology, and also contacted Luis Elizondo and Hal Puthoff, and they also gave some presentations to him. So he's getting information from a lot of disparate directions, and thankfully, at least he's getting some from the Canadian side as well. So I tried to provide as much as possible. So there's some information going on there, and oddly enough, just yesterday I heard from Larry Maguire's secretary, because my latest book is going to have a book launch in September, and Larry Maguire has agreed, as of this taping, to speak at the launch of my book. So you know, this is not a fly-by-night thing. He is dedicated to trying to find out what's going on, and I think he has the support of a lot of his constituents, and certainly a lot of other people in Canada.
I'm happy to hear that Larry is actually taking a stance and going to be hopefully moving this UAP topic more into a broader scope into the Canadian landscape. So with that said, I would love to ask you your opinion, why you think, or maybe you do or you don't, about thinking why Canadians might not be as interested in this topic, because we're so quiet about it. Canadian media doesn't talk a lot about it. You know, I think individually we might speak a lot about it, but in our culture, UFOs, even though we have a lot of UFO cases, we don't really speak on it on a broader level. Why do you think that is?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I might quibble a bit. I know
Sure.
that there actually are quite a few times when media has shown an interest. Every year when I put out the Canadian UFO survey, for example, media shows an interest and usually does some feature on it. There have been articles in the Globe and Mail and the National Post and then locally, and things have been syndicated. I've been on CTV and Chorus and things like that quite a bit. So I think media is there. I think the subject is of interest. On Facebook, there are individual Facebook groups for I think almost every province, and the groups are very active. And I'm encouraging. I actually am admin for some of the groups, and I encourage people on there to report UFOs. It's one of the way that we get UFO reports, as a matter of fact, from people who see something in New Brunswick, and so they post their what they've seen to the New Brunswick UFO group on Facebook. And it's a very efficient way. You do have to contend with spam and a lot of other trolling and things like that, as you would in any Facebook group. But the reports do come in through there, and I would say that part of it is the size of Canada too. I mean, we're a little under 40 million for a country that's larger than the United States. So getting the word out is quite difficult. But whenever there's a TV show or a Netflix movie or something about UFOs, I think Canada shows the interest. But it's true, it's not the type of thing we talk about as much anymore. It does go in waves. In the 70s, they're quite active, and into the 80s, and then I would say just before the turn of the millennium, people were really interested, and there's a lot of media interest around in 1999, and then early in the 2000s as well. But it's true, over the past little while, interest seems to have gone down. However, if you look at the actual numbers of UFOs that are reported, in 2020, the number of UFOs reported was actually the third highest on record. So people were seeing things and reporting them in very significant numbers. In 2021, the numbers fell very sharply. Whether this is all due to some sort of pandemic effect, I don't know. But it does show that the interest wanes and waxes depending on a number of factors. And, I think there's a lot of room for some scientific discourse and some investigation and some research. PhD theses and master's theses are ripe for the picking here.
Yeah, I'd love to see institutes like the Dunlop Observatory or the Dunlop Institute with U of T look into this as well. You made mentioned some great stats along with, I read one of them from you saying that Canadians see UFOs about 3 times a day that are reported, and the length is about 15 minutes long generally, and it's more than one person. It's about 2 people that have a sighting. So I think it's really unbelievable. And we have tons of them. We have tons within the Indigenous communities that are having UFO sightings. There's UFO folklore as well in Indigenous cultures. So I think it's something that for sure is very close to us. But I find personally, and I might be wrong, that I don't think we talk about it as freely as I find that other countries do. Maybe that's because of our British influence, and we are a little more conservative in our mentality at times, in the way that we talk about certain subjects. So hopefully I think that will change, and I'm open, and I'm glad that I'm seeing that media is picking up these stories way more, and they're going to people like yourself, Chris, that have been researching this for a really long time. With
and
that
the
said,
Dunlop, oh, sorry, just going to say the Dunlop Observatory itself wasn't involved, but the University of Toronto did have its own investigation program into UFOs in the Institute for Aerospace Studies. But unfortunately, and this goes back to this Project Galileo and people like that are saying science has to take a good look at UFOs. Well, the University of Toronto Institute of Aerospace Studies took a good look at UFOs, or they said it was going to take a good look at UFOs, studied probably a large handful of them, found that the ones they investigated had explanations, and the subject died. but we have the records of the University of Toronto investigations, and that wasn't that long ago. I think that was 70s or 80s that they conducted their investigations. That was a scientific investigation in Canada of UFOs, and they didn't find anything significant there. Now, there are Canadian members who are part of Project Galileo with Avi Loeb. As a matter of fact, one of his assistants contacted me directly to find out if I wanted to participate. I said yes, because I think there is some worthwhile research that needs to be done. But just the fact that a scientist is going to be looking at UFOs doesn't necessarily mean we're going to get the right amount of investigation, or the research is going to go in the direction we expect. I think it has to be taken all under consideration. Some review of history has to be taken into account. Even the United States UAP Task Force, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office that they've just formed. They're apparently not really all that interested in old cases, although that seems to be what they're getting right now. I think they have something like 200 or 300 old cases that have been reported. But we have many, many more. And in the United States alone, there's something like 10,000 cases reported every year to a number of UFO organizations, not necessarily by radar or with cameras and things like that, but people, the average citizen, is reporting things. And the FAA is actually reporting objects that it's classifying as drones, but are clearly not drones, lights in the sky that are zipping by planes and so forth. So those are continually being reported. So there's so much data. I'm optimistic that with so much data, one might be able to come up with a decent program to analyze and figure out what's going on. I'm pessimistic because there's so much data. It's going to be very hard to sort out and winnow what's good from the bad.
Yeah, I think that's going to take a really long time to sort the data. The other part too, I would say is, Canadians might have a role working with the states again, like we did in the early 70s and the 80s, and I believe the 60s as well, in researching this. And maybe we'll have, the University of Toronto will have more of an academic, scientific hand in this, in studying the data. It would be great to see that happen again, because I'm curious to see where Canada will go with this. Once we start to, maybe be more comfortable in the media and we become more free speaking about it as a country, then maybe we'll be able to move and work with people like the Galileo Project more often, or working with the United States government to help really research, or work with NASA, and researching and helping them collect data. My other question to you now, outside of that, is looking at the United Nations. What would you like, because there is this conversation right now about, hopefully having this UAP topic within the United Nations, and San Marino being that place. What do you think, where would Canada fit in that? How would Canada play a role within the United Nations? Have you thought about that?
No, that's a good question. Well, I mean, there is the Outer Space Treaty of 1965 or something like that that Canada signed on to, I think. But that, that was long before people thought about flying saucers being part of the whole thing. And of course, there was the committee that Sir Edmund Gary formulated through the United Nations back in 1974, 73. My memory is going here. So, the United Nations does have a role to play, and it's good that, some possibility that San Marino might be the location for this, because UFOs are a global problem. And, there are cases from around the world, and if Canada can participate in some way and perhaps lead the way, and I think Canada should play a significant role in this, because, of course, the history of working on the problem, both from a defense standpoint and from a scientific standpoint. And the National Research Council, stopped investigating UFOs because it was transitioning to the Canadian Space Agency, more involved with the ISS and the Canadarm and things like that. And I think there is ample opportunity for Canada to be recognized for the research that it's already done. And once that's done, moving ahead with some of the work that is being, could be done in the future.
Yeah, I agree. It'd be great to see that. And it'd be great to have you as part of that team to see that as well.
Oh yeah,
Because
pick me,
you've
Monty. Pick me.
yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
exactly. My last question to you too is, we look at the data that's been collected, and I believe that you have stopped collecting the data now, and it's been going directly to the Canadian government or Transport Canada still. And you can clarify to me. I'd love to know why they've asked you or why you decided to stop collecting that data in regards to them sending you information, I should say, not your own personal, but having them send you those reports. Why did they stop doing that? And are we going to be ending up with a UAP, a UFO office right now within the Canadian government too? Is that on the horizon?
I'm not sure if they're going to end up with a UAP office. I mean, if there's enough pressure through people like Larry McGuire and others, there might be somebody who's assigned this. I mean, even when the National Research Council was investigating UFOs, there was one person in a small corner of an office in the Hertzberg Institute in Ottawa who was assigned to gather the UFO reports. So there, and even Project Blue Book in many instances, it wasn't the glamorous thing that you see on TV. It was usually one person at most at an airbase somewhere who was gathering the reports and was terribly underfunded and couldn't go on very many investigations. So, to see Canada do something, I'm not sure if that's going to be in the budget, and that's why they stopped investigating UFOs, as a matter of fact, because it was probably going to be embarrassing to have UFO investigation as a line item in the departmental budget. As for not getting the UFO reports anymore, it's interesting that according to National Defense, they're still sending them to me. But if I haven't heard of any over the past year or so. It's strange that in 2021, I was recognized as the person that was receiving the reports from the Canadian government and doing the analysis every year, and that sort of dried up over the past year. I suspect that's what's happening is that there's a reevaluation of where the reports should be going. I'm technically a civilian researcher. I'm not affiliated with any major institute and certainly not affiliated with the Department of National Defense. So the question would be, why would they want to send UFO reports to me from military personnel anymore? I mean, I've got them. I remember a number of times when I've received calls from Canadian Forces bases regarding UFOs seen by military personnel in the past. But it makes sense that there's going to be a more rigorous procedure in place, especially since that's what's occurring now in the Pentagon, that they're implementing new procedures and policies for allowing military personnel to report UFOs and allow the investigation within the Defense Department. And since Canada does follow very closely with what the United States is doing, and because there's this still sharing of NORAD, it makes sense that the Canadian government would be reevaluating who's going to be handling the UFO report division or whatever it is. But I think it's important that somebody look into it. And until such time as we have clear indication of some department that's doing it, I mean, at the present time, even the United States, where does the average person report a UFO if they want it to be recorded by the UAP task force? It's simply not possible. Right now, anybody in Canada, whether civilian or military or government, can make a report that eventually finds its way into the Canadian UFO survey, and it's all the aggregate is analyzed, and we have that data available. So I think until things get sorted out in the United States, it'll be interesting to see how long it takes for Canada to follow suit. But let's cross our fingers and that we'll get access to some of this information, and they're going to reach out to the appropriate divisions.
Yeah, I hope so, because we have so much data, and it would be wonderful that we can look at past data and be able to see any correlations or connections along with, what's been happening even around the world. We look at the United Nations, and I've had this conversation with other people as well, saying that the time that we actually get something in the United Nations that is talking about UFOs, we'll be able to have a place where all of those UFO sightings around the world, or yearly, we can have a wonderful breakdown and look at that data even closer and better, and maybe have better analysis by what's happening from all different countries and be able to see what type of UAP activity are happening and when it's happening, what does it look like, what are the shapes, what is the propulsion systems, if we at some point hopefully figure that out, if it does any propulsion system at all. So I think that once we get to that place, and obviously Canada will have a big hand in that because of how much data we actually have, we'll probably be in a better space when we can work together globally. And
That's
I
right.
think that's
And one of
always the
the
case.
yeah, I was
Yeah.
just going to say, and one of the best sources for what we have done is my new book, Canada's UFOs Declassified,
Yes.
which is just out now. And what I've done, I've gone through the National Research Council files from the 1940s to this batch is until 1981 or 82, looking for the interesting cases and to look for some of the investigations that were done at a fairly high level and the results therein, finding cases that were, sightings by Royal Canadian Mounted Police, by pilots, by military personnel, and some of the analyses there. There were objects seen at close range. There was people are talking about metamaterials and analysis of crashed UFOs. Well, most people don't realize that in the 1960s there was a large chunk of UFO, or supposedly from a UFO, that was analyzed and looked at even by somebody from the Condon Committee. And nobody's talking about that. Nobody's talking about the pieces of UFOs, supposedly from the Falcon Lake case from 1967, other material that was acquired over the years. We're not hearing about that, and yet a lot of that material is available. So I went through some of the most interesting cases and presented them in this book called Canada's UFOs Declassified.
That's amazing. And I didn't realize that we actually had, before I even end this, I didn't even know that we had material from Falcon Lake. Just for the listener and for the viewer, can you explain what Falcon Lake, the incident was and when it was? And I believe it was in Manitoba. And I had no idea that we had crash material and where that potentially could be.
Yeah, 1967, a fellow was doing some rock hounding, trying to find some interesting rocks in an area between Manitoba and Northern Ontario. And the short story is he saw, for all intents and purposes, a Hollywood-style flying saucer land on a rock outcropping near him. As a matter of fact, where is it?
Oh, do you have? I love that wall.
I have it. I have it right here. This is a model of what he saw.
That's great.
There was the little door here that lights was shining out of. He could hear high-pitched voices, thinking there was an American secret weapon of sorts. He walked up to it, touched the side of it. It was so hot it melted his glove, and the thing took off with a blast of hot gas, set his clothes on fire, set pine needles and leaves on fire. He went to the hospital, was examined by emergency room personnel. He was looked at by Canadian Forces personnel at the military hospital as well. He went down to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester as well, because his burns were not going away. He was still not feeling well. And we have literally hundreds of pages of government records, from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to the Royal Canadian Air Force to the medical records and so forth, of what happened to this fellow. And the RCMP and the Royal Canadian Air Force both said they have no idea. They cannot explain this particular case. And there was radioactive material found at the site. We have the analysis of the radioactive material done by Atomic Energy of Canada. And there was some radioactive silver pieces found in a crack in the rock over which this thing had landed. And that piece of material, it's about 4 inches long or so, radioactive, made of silver, and has been analyzed by a number of institutions, including University of Chicago, institutions here in Canada, and is still radioactive and is sitting on my mantle.
You need to get that and show us. That's amazing. How did you end up getting that?
Well, I mean, I reopened the case when I got into UFOs really big in the 1970s. The family recognized that I was serious about my investigations and research. And in fact, Unsolved Mysteries flew them and myself down to NBC's set for an episode of Unsolved Mysteries. And I sort of worked with them on this. They were really hesitant about going to media, but I sort of was the intermediary for them. And I decided that it's time to tell the story. They were frustrated the whole story hadn't been told. Very few people knew about it, knew the details. So the son of the witness and I put together a book called When They Appeared, which is also available, just came out a few years ago, in which we detail the investigations. We present the background, some of the analyses of the materials, and it's an interesting story of what the UFO case actually did to the family. I mean, it was very disruptive. In fact, the title of the book, When They Appeared, has nothing to do with aliens. It has to do with the fact that the Royal Canadian Air Force and the RCMP showed up on the doorstep, and the media showed up on their doorstep, and it was very, very disruptive. The kids were followed home from school. They were teased, your dad saw a flying saucer, all that sort of stuff. It was, quite an interesting, detailed case study of what happens when UFOs come down to Earth.
Wow. Yeah. And it's, again, another amazing Canadian story. And we have so many of them, and a lot of people don't know about them. But I say to everyone, and I'm not just saying it because we're Canadian, but please look into all the different UAP cases that have happened in Canada, because some of them are just really unbelievable.
It's UFO, eh?
It's UFOA. It's exactly what it is. So we need a website called UFOA, and it's just all of the collection of UFO cases and studies and paraphernalia from around Canada.
Sure.
Saying that about paraphernalia, can you tell me, this wall is amazing. We were talking about this before we started recording. Can you tell me your favorite thing on that back of that wall right now that that you have there?
Yeah, that's tough. There's a couple of interesting things. I'll reach over here.
Yeah.
This actually has to do with the Falcon Lake case. This is a brand of beer that was put out by a small brewery to commemorate the Falcon Lake case. This is an American brewery that puts out an unbelievable filtered offering, so that they made some headway with that. Oh well, I have to show you this one.
Yes, please.
This is a baseball from the Las Vegas 51s, Area 51s, which was the farm team for the Toronto Blue Jays for a while, and then I think they shifted to the Red Sox. But this is there was an actual farm team, professional baseball team, farm team that was related to UFOs. So that's
hilarious.
A lot of neat little things that people have given me over the years, and that are near and dear to my heart.
Yeah. Do you have any of the coins, the commemorative coins that we have that have
I do,
UFO cases on them? Yeah.
I think
I've been, it's funny. I missed both of them because I believe there's two, and maybe there's more, and you can tell me if there is.
There's more than two.
Is there? Okay, good. Every time I go to get one, they're gone, and I've been so upset because I want
well.
one.
This is which one? This is the Falcon Lake. This is the Falcon Lake one. This is actual legal tender, pure silver, and I think it's $120 or something like that. But I recently acquired. I think this is the next one. There's another one. This is Montreal.
Right.
And then there's
it's a beautiful one.
Clarenville, and there's I know there's 4 out, and I'm not supposed to say this, but Canada Post, or not Canada, but the Canadian Mint contacted me. We're in the process of getting another one out. I can't tell you which one, but another one's coming out, I think, later this year, and there's going to be more in the series. So I think there's a total of 5 that are going to be out by the end of this year, and more to come.
That's amazing. You have to tell me before they drop what
Yeah.
the date's going to be, just so that I
Yes.
can make sure I buy one. Because every time I hear, and then I go on the website, they're gone, and I'm always upset and now trying to get them is so much harder. So I will at least have to start my collection with number 5.
Yeah,
Better
it's
starting late than never, right?
they sell out within 24 hours, and I think they said it's the fastest selling coin that they produce. I mean, there's a lot of commemorative coins that they produce, all legal tender. But yeah, to see that these things disappear so quickly, and on eBay they're astronomical. I think there's something like $1,200 or something like that for one.
Yeah, they're expensive, but they're beautiful. Thank you
Mhm.
so much, Chris. Where can people get your book? Where can they buy it?
My book is available on Amazon. Also from the publisher itself, White Crow Books in England. And by all means, take a look. And we've reproduced many of the official government documents in the book itself, so you can actually see what the government was saying about UFOs.
That's awesome. And as I say to everybody, thank you, Chris. Thanks for being rebelliously curious with me today.